In today's episode, we are doing stories about Krishna's son and grandson, Pradyumna and Aniruddha, also featuring a Shiva versus Krishna battle, prophecies, illusion artists, skydiving babies, princely abductions, and rapid arm surgery. Namaskar and welcome to Stories from India. This is a podcast that will take you on a journey through the rich mythology, folklore, and history of the Indian subcontinent. I am Narad Muni, the celestial storyteller and the original Time Lord. With my ability to travel through space and time, I have been bringing you fascinating stories from the past, the present, and the future. From the epic tales of the Mahabharata and Ramayana to the folk tales of the Panchatantra, to stories of Akbar Birbal and Tenali Raman, I have a story for every occasion. The purpose of the stories is neither to pass judgment nor to indoctrinate. My goal has only been to share these stories with people who may not have heard them before, and to make them more entertaining for those who have. In this episode, we are doing a story about Krishna's son and another about his grandson. But before we jump in, I just want to repeat the recent announcement in case you haven't heard the last 3 episodes. This podcast is about to go on a hiatus and I will not be releasing any more new episodes. Today, we've completed 5 years of this show. From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank each and every one of you. Whether you've been a long-time listener or whether you've only just started tuning in, your support, feedback, and engagement have meant the world to me, and I'm deeply grateful and humbled by all your love and encouragement over these last 5 years. While I'm away doing my regular Narad duties, visiting gods and goddesses, playing concerts in Swarg, and so on, feel free to catch up on any of the 300 plus episodes in this catalog and stay connected with me on social media. You just might hear from me soon about a new project that I'm starting on. Right now, let's dive into the deep, deep ocean, because that's what a 10-day-old baby was doing as well. Dropping from high up in the sky and into a very inhospitable part of the Indian Ocean. But back up a second here. You probably want to hear what the baby was doing in free fall over the open ocean. After all, there was a minimum age for skydiving, even back in ancient India, when the rules were much more lax on everything else. For the backstory, let's rewind the clock and travel from sea level to thousands of kilometers away into some of the highest mountains in the world. We are going to Mount Kailash, where Shiva and Parvati live. Shiva is the destroyer of the universe, and as such, he is the character you have to be careful not to anger. And yet, that's exactly what Kamdev did. Kamdev is the god of love. If you're looking for a parallel in other mythologies, Cupid comes close. They both shoot arrows that instantly make the target fall in love. The small difference is that Kamdev carries a bow made of sugarcane and flowery arrows. Cupid uses steel, silver, and gold arrows. They can really hurt. But back to what Kamdev did. You see, there was a prophecy that Shiva and Parvati's son would rid the world of an evil Asur. Shiva, as the destroyer of the universe, is part of the Holy Trinity, together with Brahma, the creator, and Vishnu, the preserver. Shameless plug here, but Brahma is my father. I am Vishnu's number one fan and president for life of his fan club. And I'm a regular visitor at Shiva's home in Mount Kailash. Anyway, one other character here is Indra, the chief of the Devs in Swarg, or heaven. By the way, I'm also a regular visitor at heaven, so I'm on chummy terms with Indra as well. You see, the Devs were being oppressed by the evil Asur, and Indra decided that he couldn't simply wait for nature to take its course and for Shiva and Parvati's child to be born. He decided to hurry matters along. So he asked Kamdev to cast a flowery arrow or two over Shiva and Parvati's way. Unfortunately, Shiva resented this intervention into his love life. He opened his third eye, which is about the most destructive force out there. In an instant, Kamdev was incinerated into just some atoms floating here and there. Kamdev's wife, Rati, was distressed and she searched everywhere for her husband. She was reborn on earth as an ordinary girl, Mayavati, and she continued looking for Kamdev there. Because Mayavati was merely a working class citizen in her earthly avatar, she had to find a job to make ends meet. But she was a hard-working girl, and soon she found an opening in the palace kitchen. She was third assistant potato peeler to the fourth chef in the kitchens of the Asur king, Shambar. This is important, and you'll soon see why. And by this, I don't mean her position as third assistant potato peeler to the fourth chef. What is important is that she was in the employ of Shambar. You see, Shambar was not a nice king, to put it mildly. Besides the usual, tax the poor to feed his own rich self, he also did the unthinkable, taking candy from a child, abducting babies from their parents, together with their candy, and whipping his servants and generally ill-treating anyone and everyone. Shambar was the least likely person to react well to a prophecy predicting his death. Just to clarify, Shambar was a different evil Asur from the one who was prophesied to be killed by Shiva and Parvati's son. Shambar heard the Akashvani, the prophetic voice from heaven, not the radio station. The Akashvani announced that Shambar was going to meet his end at the hands of Krishna and Rukmini's child. Instead of trying to investigate the source of the voice, to see if someone was pulling a prank on him using a loudspeaker, Shambar took a completely different course of action. He flew to Dwarka, where Krishna and Rukmini lived, and he found that their baby, Pradyumna, was already born. By the way, if you haven't heard of Krishna and Rukmini before, Krishna was an avatar of Vishnu, and Rukmini, that of his wife Lakshmi, who was also the goddess of wealth. Krishna was also a central character in the Mahabharata. Pradyumna had very powerful parents. But here's the kicker. Pradyumna was no ordinary baby either. He was the reassembled version of Kamdev, the very person that Mayavati had been searching for. Shambar, meanwhile, could have waited. Pradyumna was just 10 days old. Because medical science was not as advanced in ancient India, and infant mortality rates were high, life expectancy was low, there was a really good chance that the Akashvani would turn out to be false. But Shambar, just like Indra and Kamdev, did not believe in letting nature take its course. So Shambar, disguised as a palace maid, snuck into Krishna's and Rukmini's palace. On the pretext of collecting the baby's used diapers, he snuck into the room where Pradyumna was sleeping all alone. The baby didn't realize that a strange lady, not his regular nurse, was picking him up and carrying him away. Or that the strange lady was not a lady at all, but an asur intent on destroying him. But we have to make allowances for the baby's lack of perception. After all, he was only 10 days old. Things would have turned out very differently if the asur had taken some immediate decisive action to terminate the baby in a way that confirmed that the baby had indeed passed away. But Shambar decided on the simplest solution instead. Right then, he was flying home, and he was about a couple of kilometers over the Indian Ocean. This area had extremely dangerous weather, and survival was impossible, even for an adult with impressive survival skills. So, Shambar simply dropped the baby and flew straight back home. Miraculously, or because he was the avatar of a god, Pradyumna was just fine. Nothing happened to him as he plummeted towards the ocean. Nothing happened to him as his fall plunged him deep below the water's surface. And nothing happened to him as he was swallowed by an enormous fish. The baby somehow was okay. The fish was not. It was caught promptly in a fisherman's net. The fisherman was astonished. In all his years of fishing, he had never seen such a magnificent and colossal fish. It was truly one of a kind. There was only one thing to do: to head back to shore and to present this fish to his king. And so it was that the fish was presented back to Shambar. Not realizing what was in its belly, Shambar passed it on to his cook and said that he would like it served for dinner that night. And just for good measure, because he was such an evil asur, Shambar had the fisherman as well as the cook whipped. The cook took the enormous fish back to the kitchen and asked his staff to cut it open and begin preparing it for dinner. The cook's back was hurting from all the whipping, so he couldn't do it all himself. So all the assistant potato peelers, onion choppers, carrot slicers, egg boilers gathered around with their knives and began hacking away at the fish. There were cries of surprise when they discovered a baby, alive and well, in the fish's stomach. Immediately, the chef decided to call the local consulting detective to investigate the matter. Detective Byomkesh Holmes. Byomkesh had his magnifying glass permanently superglued to his hand to save him some time. He was all about efficiency. The moment he arrived and took one look at the scene, he began speaking. "Right, you want to know where that came from. I'm right, aren't I? See, no one can fool me. So here's the whole story. Far down the depths of the Indian Ocean, there's a marlin colony. This is one of the youngest members of that colony. Speedy Dan Marlin, they call him. He dropped out of school chasing a shrimp that he spotted. He has blurred vision in one eye, and that's why he didn't see the fisherman's net. If he hadn't had that extra serving of squid this morning, he would have managed to free himself." Everyone interrupted to say that they wanted to know the baby's origin, not that of the fish. Yes, I was coming to that," Byomkesh clarified. "Baby was dropped in the ocean, fell off a cruise ship. The mother's 20 years, 3 months and 12 days old. She wears a dark red shape of lipstick and Indraprasth brand bangles. She has a tattoo on her left shoulder in the shape of a hawk. Last week, she stubbed her toe, banged into some furniture after the candle in her room blew out. The father is a librarian, regularly reads all the periodicals and writes letters at least once a week to the editors of India Today, complaining about the lack of rainfall. I can also tell you that the mother has a profound dislike for rabdi, but loves jalebi and shrikhand. Now, that'll be 10,000 rupees for the initial consultation. My man Ajit here can take your check or swipe your credit card or whatever. If you want more info, you'll need to book a time slot longer than 5 minutes next time. That didn't really help anyone. And for 10,000 rupees, they still didn't know what to do with the baby. That's when Mayavati stepped up. Given her heavenly powers as Rati, Mayavati recognized her husband. She picked up the baby and begged the others to let her take care of him. None of the others knew anything about Pradyumna or the prophecy, so they didn't see this gentle baby as a threat to their king. And besides, doing the right thing would have involved taking the baby to Shambar. And the cook's bag was not looking forward to another whipping. So Mayavati took the baby home, and she took care of it. To her, it was not an option to risk taking the baby back to Krishna and Rukmini. It would bring the parents joy, but Shambar would also find out, and he would try to destroy Pradyumna again. Restoring the baby to the parents was the equivalent of putting a target on its back, according to Mayavati. It was a little bit weird taking care of her own husband, changing his diapers, helping him burp after giving him Cerelac. But Mayavati didn't mind. She was overjoyed at having found her husband after all these years of searching. Many more years passed, and Pradyumna had now grown into an adult. Mayavati had homeschooled Pradyumna in everything. Academics, but also practical things, like warfare, and very importantly, in the art of Mahamaya, which you can think of as the art of illusion. Before you go thinking that Pradyumna was being trained to become a stage performer, like David Copperfield or P.C. Sarkar or David Blaine, let me clarify that Maya was much more than that. In our very first episode, episode 0, I had a very jarring introduction to Maya from Vishnu himself, the master of this art. It can be extremely powerful. So anyway, when Rati felt that Pradyumna was ready for the showdown with Shambar, she told him everything. Of course, he was weirded out for having been taken care of by his wife, whom he had considered a mother figure until now. But that was something he could deal with afterwards. Right now, he had to go fulfill the prophecy and destroy Shambar. He took up a special sword that Rati had procured for him and headed straight for Shambar. The king demanded to know who this handsome stranger was. He looked like Krishna, but he couldn't be Krishna. And he couldn't be Krishna's son either, because Shambar had killed the boy many years ago. Pradyumna said that he was that boy. And Shambar was so incompetent, he had even failed to kill a baby that was entirely at his mercy. Angered by this comment, Shambar flung hundreds of venomous snakes at high speed at Pradyumna. And Pradyumna casually cast them aside, because they weren't hundreds of venomous snakes. This was just Shambar using his powers of illusion. And Pradyumna similarly cast aside scorpions, boulders, and arrows. No, wait, the arrows were real, so his powers of illusion defense didn't have any effect. But his sword did. He repelled the arrows by twirling the sword, like he was some kind of a Jedi Knight waving his lightsaber. It worked. He got close enough to Shambhar, and then one quick swipe of his sharp sword, and Shambhar was no more. People all over the kingdom were thrilled by Shambhar's demise. But there was definitely a part of the population that wondered who would be there to whip them now. Pradyumna and Mayavati flew back to Dwarka in a cloud, again using her superpowers. There was initially some confusion about who this young man was. He looked like Krishna, but he couldn't be Krishna. Luckily for everyone, I was there in Dwarka that day, and I played the mediator, explaining all sides of the story to everyone. It took a long while, but it ended in a tearful family reunion after all. Pradyumna stayed in Dwarka much of his life. In the Mahabharata, he even helped train Abhimanyu, Arjun's son. But he himself did not participate in the war, because he was off on a pilgrimage with his uncle, Balram. Pradyumna had another wife when Rukmavati chose him during her Swayamvar. You know, a groom reveal party? Like a super sped up version of The Bachelorette, if you've seen that reality TV show. Rukmavati and Pradyumna had a baby together, Aniruddha. This grandson of Krishna was pretty handsome himself, and he was popular with the ladies. Popular enough that Usha, an Asur princess, abducted him and kept him hidden in her chambers. There was a good reason to keep him hidden. Her father, Banasur, would not approve. Banasur was the ruler of Sonitapur. He was a devotee of Shiva, and he impressed the destroyer of the universe by his ability to play the mridangam when Shiva danced the tandav. The mridangam is a musical instrument, a percussion instrument. Banasur had the massive advantage of having 1,000 arms. So basically, yeah, he could have performed as an entire orchestra all by himself. Impressed by his musical ability, Shiva had granted Banasur a boon, and the Asur asked for Shiva's help in defending his city. You'll soon see why this matters. Aniruddha and Usha fell in love in a way that wasn't just Stockholm Syndrome. After several weeks of Aniruddha secretly living in the princess's chambers, Banasur found out when he saw that his daughter was suddenly eating all her meals in her chamber, and she had doubled all her portions besides. At first, he thought she was hiding a pet she had rescued from somewhere. But when the pet turned out to be a young man, Banasur was furious. Luckily for everyone, he didn't execute Aniruddha on the spot. He merely imprisoned him. Normally, I don't like to intervene. I believe in nature taking its course, unlike Indra, Kamdev and Shambhar. But this time I had to intervene, because Banasur might change his mind and have Aniruddha executed after all. And I knew that Aniruddha's family was getting anxious. They had been searching for him. And a month later, they had still not found a sign. So I went to Dwarka and I told them where Aniruddha was. Infuriated by Banasur's actions, Aniruddha's family prepared for war. Never mind that it was Banasur's daughter who was actually responsible. And never mind questioning why Aniruddha hadn't sent them a secret message in the weeks before Banasur discovered him. Aniruddha's family, led by Krishna and Pradyumna, fought Banasur's soldiers and quickly destroyed them. This was turning out to be a very one-sided battle until Banasur called on Shiva to help. Shiva and his son Kartikeya entered the battle themselves, and suddenly the scales were evenly balanced. Krishna's Sudarshan Chakra quickly demolished Banasur's chariot despite Shiva's protection, and the Sudarshan Chakra even chopped off 996 of Banasur's arms. Shiva and Krishna fired all kinds of weapons at each other: Brahmastra, Narayanastra, Pashupatastra, and many more, and they all countered each other. Thankfully, the damage to the rest of the world from these highly destructive weapons was fairly limited. But it might not remain so. So for the second time in such a short while, I felt the need to intervene, despite my inclination not to do so. Being on friendly terms with everyone has the massive advantage that I can persuade people to come to the negotiating table. And that's all I had to do in this case. Krishna and Shiva both immediately reasoned that there was an easier way out of this. Shiva only wanted Banasur to not be killed, and Banasur shared that sentiment. Krishna clarified that he never intended to kill Banasur. After all, Banasur was Prahlad's great-grandson, and Prahlad was Vishnu's fan. Not his number one fan, because that would be me. But Prahlad was extremely devoted to Vishnu. That story was covered in episode 20 and 21. Anyway, Krishna just wanted to limit the number of arms Banasur had. 4 was still a really good number. Banasur could still play the mridangam competently. And in return for sparing his life, Banasur agreed that Usha and Aniruddha could be married. Funny how no one thought to ask the couple if they wanted to marry each other. But neither Usha nor Aniruddha had any objections, so it was all okay in the end. Except it was not okay in the very end, because far later, both Aniruddha and Pradyumna perished in a big fight amongst the Yadavas. Gandhari, the mother of the Kauravas in the Mahabharata, had cursed Krishna that his entire clan would perish before his eyes. And that is what happened. Besides Krishna, Aniruddha's son Vajra was the only other survivor of the great Yadav fratricide. Vajra became king of Indraprastha. Krishna himself didn't live too long after that. He was killed in an accident when a hunter mistook him for a deer and fatally injured him. That's all I have on the story. One note. You may have heard about Perseus from Greek mythology. There's one aspect in which Pradyumna's story might remind you of Perseus. Perseus was the son of Zeus and great-grandfather of Hercules. He battled Medusa, chopped off her head, and rescued the princess Andromeda from a giant sea monster that was about to eat her. Perseus's grandfather, King Acrisius of Argos, heard from the oracle that Perseus would kill him. Fearing for his life, he took both his daughter and his newborn grandson and tossed them into the sea. Luckily, Perseus survived because he was rescued by a fisherman. And of course, the prophecy came to pass. Well, that's all I have. Thank you all for the comments on social media and on Spotify. I'll try and reply to your comments directly there. Please do share your thoughts about the show by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or comment on Spotify. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. You can listen to all of the 303 episodes out there on all podcast apps, as well as on YouTube. If you want to send me an email, it's storiesfromindiapodcast@gmail.com. Again, a very big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback over the last 5 years. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure bringing you all these stories.